Hi, and welcome back to the China Stories. This is Michael Rice. I've done once again today, Saturday, 5/16/2020, here in Beijing, China. What I do every Saturday, I go out and wander around and take pictures of stuff, often useless stuff. But today I got a bug, and so I decided to go take pictures of people. I shared on Instagram a couple of days ago a picture of a 5:30 rush hour. I had been picking up my iPad from a fellow who repaired it. And the rush hour at 5:30 p.m. was absolutely gargantuan. It was a nice thing to see. A lot of people are talking about how it's nice to see, as much as they hate traffic jams, it's nice to be sitting in one again when things were so hopeless prior to this. And it got me thinking about my country. I've been reading a lot of Chinese media, Global Times, People's Daily, and I've been reading them because they're very heavy with propaganda, and it's always interesting to see how they portray the U.S. And of course, they portray the U.S. very much like the media in the United States portrays the U.S. U.S. bad, Orange Man bad, Donald Trump is crazy, The WHO is wonderful, but the United States is bungling the virus response, and that the suits filed by congressmen and other people in the United States not only violate international law, undermine the rule of international law, but are in fact just nuisance suits, and the United States has lost its mind. So that's the state media here in Beijing. And they've decided, of course, that, they can't take responsibility in any way. And of course, the rest of it is filled with this wonderful stuff about, how much the Chinese are helping the world and how much they're reaching out. All of these are amazing stories. And you read them, and of course, they're that wonderful propaganda, that amazing propaganda that if you think for yourself, you notice, that is rich with partial truths. How China is responding in this way, and it's because China's so great that they're doing this, and that they've been helping all along is the next trope they go with. So before I get too far off track on all the reading I've been doing, I decided to go take a look at the response and how that response is affecting the Chinese, and specifically in a way that I'm worried about the United States. Because whatever you want to say, there is no black and white. I'm sorry, but the idea of not wearing a mask is just stupid. I think we'd be back at work if we could have sold the idea, except for the most extreme cases of politicians like Michigan, or the hypocritical politicians like Trudeau that traveled across the border to go home to Quebec for Easter when he told, in fact, everyone else to stay home. Outside of those examples and many other like them, I think there's something to be considered in the fact that the Chinese are getting back to work. Everywhere I go, the barbershops are open. There's nobody saying, don't open your damn barbershops. They're doing it now, and we need to be doing it yesterday. The Chinese know people will die, and granted, they have more people to kill off, and the state doesn't really care about anything other than getting back to an economic standing. But the United States is not going to be easily recovered. Now, I am a First Amendment proponent. I am a Second Amendment proponent. I believe that those things are essential to the rights of man, that they are not just the United States' right, but they should be the rights of every country in the world. But most other countries don't have anything that even approximates a First Amendment freedom of speech. So any politician who is putting people in jail or trying to shame them publicly for protesting policies they don't like about the government is, in fact, a bad actor. Whether or not they're bad people, I can't say because I don't know them. But I can tell you that I'm putting this position forward first so that you know that while I'm not a flag-waving, pound-the-drum conservative, I am a strong believer in the Constitution. I believe you have a right to own a gun. I believe the Constitution provides that right, or I should say supports that right. And then I believe that because we're Americans, we have decided that personal responsibility is huge. And so we say, if you keep a gun in your home, you, by God, had better not let your kids play with it. Or all of these other stupid things. Lock them up in safe ways that allow you to continue to maintain your right to have personal protection for your family, which, as we all know, God, I love the police, the good ones, but they cannot provide immediate protection to you and your family should someone wish to assault you or break into your home or harm your family in some way. That seems so obvious to me. And I've tried to think the other way. I really have. I'm like, maybe we need a gun registry. Maybe we need to have, like we do for cars, pictured licenses for guns, but you don't protect the democracy with a car. So you do, however, protect the democracy with guns. So here's what I think on the other side of all this. I don't believe the American people want to be led. I don't believe anybody really wants to be led. I believe sometimes they need to be led, but I believe other times they need to be left alone. And that other times would be 90% of the time. There's been the question asked often and loudly sometimes, what is government for? Why does it exist? And that really comes down to the divide that you probably have with me. You believe government should be providing for you in this time of need, when in fact they should be providing only for those people who can't provide for themselves, and they should not be standing in the way of people's ability to provide for themselves. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, not the guarantee. So, all of that being said, I don't understand why you people won't wear masks. It is not an infringement on your personal rights to wear masks. It's uncomfortable, and it's annoying, especially on a hot day. It seems to me that if a few months ago we said, hey, listen, if everybody wears masks and certain PPE or washes their hands on a recorded schedule and we keep track of that at work, would it be possible for people who are least likely to be infected or to be killed by the virus to go back to work so that our economy doesn't end up in the tank? And at that time, it would have maybe circumvented some of these more draconian governors and mayors and whatever else. And the police who are enforcing the rules, while Seattle fires a policeman who says you can't and don't have the right to do so. A real American gets fired as tyranny rises. But why won't you wear masks? Why won't you make an effort to wear certain PPE in certain situations? What's wrong with attempting to social distance? And for all of you people who are doing that, that's great. I think it's important. Now, there are people who don't wear masks in China, especially now as it's no longer actually required. It's strongly recommended, which I'm not sure what that means in China. It could be required. But if it were strongly recommended in the United States, what would happen is what's happening in China. People would wear masks on the street. People would wear masks in close gatherings, on the elevator, in malls, etc. In restaurants where they're eating with friends or by themselves, they'd be allowed to take their masks off. And there might be the possibility of them sitting, one chair apart, or as they did in the height of the thing here, you couldn't have two people sitting on the same side of the table. That was mostly for foreigners. Because you'd be sitting at a bar, you'd be sitting at a restaurant, and you and your friend are sitting literally at two separate tables. And a whole group of Chinese people would come in and just, sit up. And if they were young, they'd start macking on each other. So there was a certain amount of foreigners are diseased. There is a prejudice in China that, again, I think, as I shared, it stems mostly from a xenophobia. If you're from another country, if you look different than Chinese people. And the converse of that is, I believe, proof in its absence, in that American Chinese people come to China and they're immediately spoken to in Chinese, and people are shocked that they're from another country. And they're treated deferentially until that time occurs. And then they're like, oh, whatever, you must be from one of those other horrible nations that we don't like. So here we are. I wanted to make the point that I think that if there's a compromise to be made. I'm telling you, barbershops, restaurants, they're talking about opening public pools, which I find it hard to believe that wasn't already possible, because I thought, the chlorine and the bleach in the water killed the virus. But again, I don't want to argue about pools or locker rooms there. I will say there are some sections in town where they're concerned because there are actual cases. and the possibility of spreading the disease is stronger. So those communities are still locked in. And I still go by a closed gate, although they know me now and they know I'm not diseased, so they let me by. So they're not being unreasonable. On the ground, the Chinese people are not fascists. The Chinese Communist Party is. Elon Musk is my new hero. I thought he was a weirdo, and he is a weirdo. Don't get me wrong. He's a weird dude. But he understands fundamentally, even as a South African, right? Born a South African, naturalized United States citizen, he says it is your right to pursue happiness. He says, let's get back to work. And every one of you scaredy cat crybaby fascists is saying that he wants to go back to work because he wants to victimize poor people. First of all, do you think there's any poor people that actually work at any of Musk's plant, whether it be SpaceX or whether it be his electric car factories or any of his other ventures? Do you think any of those people are actually poor? They may be now because of the virus, but they certainly were not before that. There are plenty of people here in China that are willing to get back to work, and their government has realized, more important than anything else, they want to preserve their nation. Now, I'm not advocating dick from the CCP, except you have to look at those things which they're doing, which are going to preserve China as a nation and its people. And you can compare that directly to what we're doing in the United States, and you will find that the United States is not doing enough to make sure that the United States is preserved so that we can continue to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We need to get back to arguing about gun control and whether or not it's okay to talk in the movies and whether or not it's one of those things that people just play their music too damn loud or whatever. We need to get back to that, to the trivial arguments. I even kind of long for the arguments about gender, which we're not hearing much of these days, are we? So in closing, what do you want, America? Do you want a nation where the politicians get to tell you how to live? Do you want a nanny state, a real nanny state? Because I'm looking at one where I'm sitting in Beijing. And yet, somehow, barbershops are open. And people are getting back to work. What do you want, America? Someday I want to come home. And someday I want to see that we've passed through this without turning it into a situation where we have to clear whatever we do with politicians. It's time to start saying all of the hoops you've been making us jump through, stop now. You will either return the choice to go back to work to the people who it most affects and stop with the shame and fear, or what's the next step? And that all comes down to, what do you want? What do you want, America? You've been listening to the China Stories with Michael Rice. I'm here in Beijing. Follow me on Podbean, YouTube, and Facebook. And you might want to catch my Instagram, Mike Rice in China, one word. Everybody, to quote Lawrence Fox, the world is wondrous wide. And as I always say, always be courageous and kind. And we'll see you next time.